welcome to the nonprofit world. Today, we have a very special opportunity to spend time with a fascinating man with many fascinating stories to relate, Conrad Mathai. He's had a remarkable career in stage, in film, in television, both in front of the audience and behind the scenes where some of us believe the real action is. He is a force who believes that the theater can play a large role in the life of a community and the nonprofit theater as well. He's been described as a sterling actor with sterling acting abilities, and we even have the clips from some years ago that specifically said that. He's produced many Broadway plays, has acted in numerous productions all over the country. He's also appeared in daytime dramas where he played many characters, some very distinguished, some with ne'er-do-well characters. And he had a major role in a film called Journey Out of Darkness, where he also made the film happen before filming ever began. Here in Connecticut, he was once the president of the American Shakespeare Theater in Stratford, which his tenure there began in the 1970s. He was also involved in nonprofits in Florida, where his daughter is still involved. Conrad is from the Detroit area, more specifically Ann Arbor, where his family has a large history with the University of Michigan. And their former family home has now been converted into a now public golf course, one of the best designed in America. And there's a botanical garden there in their honor. Plus, in the past couple of months, a new bike trail has been dedicated. It's a pleasure to have you on the nonprofit world, Conrad. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jerry. Thank you for that very kind introduction.
I have to ask you, with all of the things you have done in the performing arts, did you always know that that would be your avocation, or did it come to you later?
The performing arts was not my avocation; it was my vocation. As my vocation, I realized that more and more as I was going through my high school years and pre-college years. But I had, you touched on it, my father was a wonderful fellow, and was an industrialist who worked in Detroit, and he founded the American Metal Products Company, one of the largest American auto supply parts manufacturers. But it was a long commute, but he liked the country, and he settled in near Ann Arbor, which was his alma mater. And as you mentioned, it became called Radrick Farms, which was the names of my brother, my elder brother Frederick, and my last syllable of my first name, Conrad, became a Radrick. But
and your father let you do that?
Well, he did. Well, he came up with the name. So I said, well, hey, maybe it should be called Rick Rad. I mean, after all, my brother's older than I am. But he said, no, we'll keep it Radrick. Thank you very much. But he, as it was a devoted alumnus of University of Michigan, and he mentioned asking why I wasn't going in the theater. I always felt that that's where I should be, but there were strong pulls, being in Ann Arbor, the home of the University of Michigan, that I should be a Michigan person, Ann Arbor person, and there's no other work to be done than automotive work to be done. So I had these pulls of saying, how am I going to get in the theater world that I want to do? So I began looking for ways as I went along and pursued an apparently normal existence otherwise, and found ways that I could begin acting and experimenting. And one of the first things I did was, well, of course, summer stock when I could, but in Ann Arbor, I was in productions in Ann Arbor High School productions, theatrical productions, and whenever I could in the theater, in the school year, I worked them in, and gradually did more and more in summer stock, and bit by bit. And then I found that that's where I really needed to be.
At that time, was it on stage or behind the scenes?
A little bit of both. If they needed, depending on where they needed help. If they needed somebody backstage to make things hum and go, I would work there, but I would prefer to be on the stage to make things happen there in an interesting way.
At that time, were you also interested in the musical part of the stage, musical productions?
Always was interested in music. I began my piano instructions in part of my career when I was at age 6, and took lessons for about 16 or 20 years in grade school and high school, and continued just into college or just before college. And so I enjoyed that part too. So it was musical, and it blended with my acting as well.
The music lessons of those days used to be, really classical oriented. Weren't teachers really teaching the classical form of? Yes. You would learn basic Mozart tunes rather than show tunes, for example.
Oh, absolutely.
How did you make that transition from classical training to popular?
Well, it's quite easy. If you become proficient in classical, you can do popular music quite well when you get your technique down. But it was important to have that technique down first. And so, yes, Bach etudes and Chopin etudes and waltzes, but all the basics had to be done perfectly. And I had piano teachers who were very particular and said, just a minute, let's go back and do that over again.
Now, that had to be frustrating for a young man.
Well, yes, but that's part of it.
As a 6-year-old.
That's part of how you begin to learn and learn to do it right, I think.
So, summer stock in the area, university training, high school training. When did you start to move away from your home territory and experience theater elsewhere?
Well, I suppose it started when I was graduated from Ann Arbor High School and began looking around to where I should go to college. And I had friends who had been at Yale, and so I was sort of interested to explore that possibility and possibly going to college at a place other than Michigan. But how was I to convey that to my dad as an ardent alumnus?
Was he also, I know he was a regent at the university system. Was he a regent then?
He was not a regent at that point, but he was an active, very active alumnus. But I persisted, and I said, well, let me just give it a try, Dad. So we kept going much that way, and gradually, and he began to see that there's a possibility there, and maybe this guy has something in his mind that he should pursue. So, and when it came time to apply for Yale, I was accepted. It took a while for me to break the news, but I did. And there's a big swallow and a frown and cheer. Well, if you got to try it, go ahead. You'll learn by making mistakes, I think was said. So I enjoyed my Yale experience very much and got more acting in there, worked with the Yale Dramat and worked in several Yale productions and summer stock again there when I was not, obviously not in school at that point. So, and it just sort of went on from there.
What kind of productions were done at Yale then? Did they include musicals as well as serious drama?
They did. They covered both. Dramat did musicals and serious drama.
Were you, I have to ask, a member of the famous Whiffenpoofs from Yale?
Yes.
Oh my.
I was, and I am. Once a Whiffenpoof, always a Whiffenpoof. We are poor little lambs who've lost our way, but only singing did we lose our way. I was delighted.
Would you care to sing a few verses of that famous song?
We are poor little lambs who have lost our way. Ba, ba, ba. We are little black sheep who have gone astray. Ba, ba, ba. Gentlemen songsters, off on the spree. damned from here to eternity. God have mercy on such as we. Ba, ba, ba. More than a few verses, a few phrases, but hey, had to get it all out.
You did. That nearly brought a tear to my eye.
Nearly?
Nearly.
I'll try it again then.
As an aside, we were talking about classical music, etc. I heard an interview with a Mozart expert who once said, if Mozart were alive today, what do you think he'd be working in? And he thought for a moment and said, musical theater. And that makes perfect sense, doesn't it? And it sounds like that's very much your passion as well. So you had an opportunity in college to really spread your wings and make some probably valuable lifelong connections with individuals, with other actors, with maybe producers. What were some of the most valuable lessons you learned as a student in terms of the stage and acting in general?
Well, you learn most about the theater, I think, by doing it and being in part of it. So you learn in the productions whether you were too soon in picking up on a person's cue, or whether you didn't give enough time for the audience to react to a line, if there was a reaction to be had there. So I found that most of that learning was done on the job, the best, and good experience, of course, in summer stock when you had a little less professional critique, and you could experiment more with what you wanted to work on as an actor.
Probably ad lib after the play had been open a week or so and see what you could get away with, perhaps with the audience?
Well, not too much ad-libbing.
Well, in terms of a slightly
Professional
different...
theater, you do the script as it was written. And if you got a director there who's saying, what did you say there? You don't do that too often.
You had an opportunity to do some television not too long after college
Yes.
was finished. Is that correct?
I did.
There was a lot of, and people today might not realize this, but there was a lot of drama on TV, on network TV. There were numerous shows that stood out. One of them, the United States Steel Hour, in which you were able to do some dramatic work on that series. When you made the transition to taking on work in TV, did you find you had to change the way you act, the way you deliver lines?
Well, yes, it's a different scenario. You're working with a camera on TV, and you don't have to project as you would in an audience on the stage with maybe 5,000 in the audience, or 6,000 or 50 rows to the back of the house. So there's definite technical modulation that you need to adjust, and emotional as well, because on stage you have to project your emotions more broadly than you do on television. So yes, it's a different world.
Yeah, literally, a different world. Yeah. Wasn't that the name of one of the television shows you were associated with?
And As the World Turns was probably one.
And As the World Turns. Now, for As the World Turns, I believe that was shot in California. Is that right?
No, that was shot in New York.
Oh, it was? Yeah. Okay. Very good. That had to be as close to a day job, working in daytime drama, as anything in a non-performing arts career can be. Yes. You go to the same place every day, yeah. Et cetera, et cetera. What is it like to appear as a regular in a daytime drama?
Different kind of discipline. But as you say, it's like going to work every day, and you put on that jacket and that character, and you think about it as you're maybe commuting from home to the studio, and make sure you had all your lines down, and you make sure you study the next day's scene. we were given scripts about a week that covered a week, and so we could work on them for the whole week. But you best know your lines when you get to the studio, and and not cut anybody else off.
At that time, were those shows airing live or were they taped?
They were airing live. Yeah.
Wow.
So, but those are demanding but very precise kind of rules and that you had to follow.
Did you find it rewarding?
Well, yes, when you bumped into that person well, it was rewarding getting the script right and being able to deliver the performance and the development of the character for that day. But also extracurricularly, when you're out and somebody said, you were Casey Arnold? And then they were thrilled with that, or whether I was Roy Maguire, the lovable dope peddler. No, Casey Arnold was the lovable dope peddler. Roy Maguire was sort of a crook of some kind. I forgot which.
I'm glad you mentioned that, and because I should have mentioned this before, but here is a photo of Conrad appearing on the series As the World Turns in the character of Roy Maguire. Is that correct?
Correct.
And this is from an article that looks to have come from a fan magazine in that day in the 1960s.
Did you say Bad or Fad magazine?
A fan magazine.
Oh, Fan. Oh,
Oh,
good.
it was a great magazine because it had you in it.
Yes.
But the article that comes with this, it's worth repeating some of the items here. It mentions his character, Roy Maguire, as being complicated. What we could tell her is that the handsome actor who plays him, Conrad Mathai, is twice as complicated, but in the nicest and most interesting way. Eloquent in speech, suave in manner, Conrad, or Super K, as his real wife calls him, is every inch a gentleman, not the lost lamb who's lost his way. Proof of his sterling acting ability is that Conrad's background is nothing in the least like that of the tough, semi-literate ex-con who was trying to make good as a medical technologist at Memorial Hospital. There's the ne'er-do-well we were talking about earlier. Does that bring back memories?
It does indeed. Thanks for sharing that, Jerry.
Certainly, and wearing a beard there, which was quite handsome on you. So we appreciate that.
I don't know if I could get as full as a beard today, but
Like old wines, we aged that well.
yours is quite full, handsome beard.
Oh, I saw my cosmetologist today, and we're all set, I believe. Now, you also had an opportunity, in addition to doing television and several roles on television, a motion picture opportunity came along for you.
Yes.
That was quite exciting. The film was Journey Out of Darkness, and just the title sounds very compelling. What was the storyline of that film?
Well, it was a storyline of a Constable Peterson, the part I played, who was called upon. He was a rigid kind of policeman, shall we say, who was called upon to recover an escaped Aborigine who had been imprisoned incorrectly, which he found that he had been imprisoned incorrectly before he undertook it. But he went out into the outback in Australia, which is a gorgeous scenery and wild place to film and to be and work, to look for this character. And we found and then tried to bring him back and tried to bring him back in and reintroduce him to society. And but it was a challenging role and a beautiful filming opportunity.
I've read that the title Out of Darkness didn't so much refer to, well, it did refer to the rural area to which Peterson, the constable, had to pursue the fellow.
Right.
But the internal journey that the constable went through, what he learned about his fellow man in the process. Is that
Exactly.
correct?
That was A Journey Out of Darkness. Very astute, Jerry, well perceived.
The story was shot by an Australian production company with British ties, correct?
Yes.
How did you find out about the project?
One of the directors for my television shows asked me whether I would consider it, and they approached him to direct Journey Out of Darkness. And he said he'd do it if he could bring this American actor down. And he did. And I came. And I went.
Well, he must have been a terrific representative to have an American character, an American actor play the part
Yes.
of an Australian.
Right. I had to work on the Australian accent, which didn't come easy.
What are some tips you can give us about how to affect an Australian accent?
Well, I don't know that I can remember any, but sort of flat and broad and not like we speak. But I'd have to do some studying and recall what that.
Perhaps a return trip to Australia.
Yes, return to Journey Out of Darkness. Say.
Hey, you should run with that.
Yeah.
So this was not shot in studios for the most part. It was shot
On location.
on location.
Yeah.
How difficult? That had to have been difficult. You had to have brought all your equipment with you, all the actors, the crew.
Well, I wasn't producing it, so they had to bring me along and bring all of my equipment along with me. But they did, and it was a very satisfying work experience.
How long were you there?
About 4 months.
My goodness. So it must have been a labor of love as well as a once-in-a-lifetime experience.
It was indeed. But I would call home weekly or bi-weekly, the long-distance calls, and check on things and see how the family was doing, whether everybody was behaving themselves.
And they were probably expecting wonderful souvenirs and gifts when you returned home.
Yeah, that's right.
You mentioned you weren't the producer of that film, but that belies the fact that part of your career and what makes you such a renaissance man in a lot of ways is you've done more than act. You have been a producer yourself.
Yes.
You had the opportunity to produce theater
Absolutely.
on Broadway.
Yes. A great opportunity.
A Broadway producer, that sounds like the sort of thing that anybody would be super happy to have on their resume, but you've done so much more. You've worked in some of the best theaters on Broadway and with some of the greatest names in the business. You've worked plays, you've produced musicals. Two that stand out to me in looking at your record, looking at Playbill, is one that starred Katharine Hepburn and also had a young actor. He was he was Superman in the movies. Christopher Reeve. Christopher Reeve was in the play with Katharine Hepburn, A Matter of Gravity.
Yes.
Again, I have to ask you, how do you find projects like that as the producer? But let's take a step back for people who may not understand what a producer does. What is the role of a producer with a Broadway play?
Well, you first of all decide on whether a property is appropriate and would be selling and is important enough to appeal to a large audience. So you might start with the property, and then you think about who you would like to have starring in the role, who might attract people to come to the box office to pay for your investment, and your investment that you may raise with partners that you have worked with before, or if not, just new people to the theater who you would like to convince should invest in the theater, not only for the excitement of the drama, but to make a little money. And sometimes they do, and many times they don't. So that the challenge comes there of using all those kind of judgments. But I was fortunate to have good friends and associates, Robert Whitehead and Roger Stevens, who were my co-partners. I co-produced that, A Matter of Gravity, with them. And they were like my guides into the professional theater. And but it was very challenging, very exciting experience.
So you come upon the property, the script. How does that come into your possession? How do you become aware of those?
Sometimes people know that you're producing, and so they make sure that new writers get the book, the property, and the script. Make sure they submit them to you, and you read them, and you decide whether it's indeed worthwhile. Or you have somebody in your office who you trust read it, but that's later after you've made a couple of productions, produced them.
And then would you be the person approaching the actors to offer the parts to them?
No, you hire as a casting director, and word gets out that I may be producing such and such a play, and then they distribute, or your office distributes, or someone in the agencies around will have a list of the characters in the play, and maybe a description of who they are. And the agents would familiarize themselves with the characteristics of the people they're casting. And they would know, looking down their resume and their acting list, who might be right. So XYZ agency might submit 5 or 6 characters for your play, and they make sure they come to the tryout and audition. So it's sort of very much a hand-picked arrangement.
Almost curated.
Curated, but you need to have the director by that time is in and he's saying he's doing the help, and it's not the producer who does the casting, the director does most of it.
Sure, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Having been on both sides of that, having been the person setting up the need for casting and being cast, going to auditions, did you have a preference?
I think I preferred to go to an audition. Try my wares. If I liked the part and the role, then I would rather prove how well I could do it. And sometimes it worked and sometimes it didn't. But hey, how do you know?
Sounds like the old phrase, that's showbiz. Right?
That's right.
Literally.
Yeah, how did you come up with that, Jerry?
I don't know. I think I stole it, probably from you.
Oh, no.
So your musical background, your interest in music, many years of piano lesson, also led you to produce Broadway musicals.
Absolutely.
One of them, George M. exclamation point. A tribute to one of the greatest Broadway song and dance men and impresarios ever.
George M. Cohan.
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
And you had one of the finest song and dance men on Broadway in the lead role.
Joel Grey, absolutely.
Just saying those names or hearing those names, and now that I'm just 1 degree of separation from you, gives me a thrill. It has to be exciting to be able to say, I am producing a work with a talent that large.
Yeah, it is, no question. No question, there's a great thrill in that.
In a case like that, do you seek him out aggressively, someone like that, because you know of
Yes, absolutely. And when you start, the very first thing you do when you have a lead like that, you have to say, are you interested in doing that? And yes, he usually respond enthusiastically, so you become really partners in it. And Joel may, as he did, come up with many suggestions for different characters in the production.
Someone like that with such talent and such background must bring a lot to the production.
No question about it. No question about it.
He was nominated for a Tony in that role, as I understand.
He was, yes.
What sort of numbers were there? Were some of those numbers actually written by George M. Cohan?
Absolutely. Most of the music was George M. Cohan's music. And there was a wonderful trove of it that, of course, as you know, that he wrote. Give my regards to Broadway. Everybody knows that song.
Yes. Part of the Great American Songbook.
Yeah.
In that play, I know that there was a film starring James Cagney that had been done, chronicling the life of George M. Cohan. How did that inform the writing of the book for your play, George M.? Did you try to chronicle his life in the same way the film did? Did you go out of your way to make it different?
That was really up to the screenwriter, but it was up to his job to make it a demanding and interesting production in itself.
A Broadway musical seems like such a much larger undertaking than, I don't want to say just a play, but a play even with a full cast. Because we're talking there about musicians, choreographers, that sort of thing. How much does that go into all of the planning in advance, knowing the theater that you're going to be able to do that? For example, just the number of theaters that can handle a musical production must be limited compared to just straight plays.
Oh, it does, no question about it. There were plays that are specifically designed. It had to be a larger house because the ticket prices were usually more than straight plays, and it had to have the capacity to absorb larger audiences. But you had to really pick. We had the Palace Theater, which was a wonderful Broadway, old famous Broadway house, and it just sort of suited it was the right place for George M. to be. And we were able to get it. Sometimes it wasn't, the theater may not have been available when we wanted to produce and get the show on, but that has to be modulated too. And if you have a production all cast, then you have to time it so the rehearsal period is concluded and fully used to get to the theater on time, as they say.
And then sometimes a production needs to move to a different theater. Exactly. I remember when the play, the musical 42nd Street was playing in the 80s. They had to move to a theater, and to make a big deal out of it, they had the chorus tap dance from the former theater to the new theater.
Right, with photographers on the route getting pictures of it so they could put it in the paper.
Absolutely. So promotion, a big part of what you do as a producer.
Absolutely.
I wanted to ask you a few questions about your family life. As we were just talking about the importance of promotion, it makes me wonder, was that one of the reasons that you asked a portrait photographer named Diane Arbus to do what turned out to be very famous portraits of you and your family? In fact, it was an exhibit not that long ago at Mount Holyoke College at the Art Museum of some of her work, which prominently figured your family.
It did indeed. It was a very wonderful collection and gathering by the work of two professors, one at Mount Holyoke and one at the University of Kansas, and they collaborated, and they said, let's get these Arbus photos together. She was working on a wonderful piece of hers, her family family catalogs, or family albums, she called them.
Family albums.
And she was working with a number of famous families, or even more famous than ours, but this all seemed to fit in, and it fit in with our plans because my brother and his family, who lived in Michigan, stayed in Michigan, and he raised a wonderful family there. And we, who were in New York and the East, gave us a chance to get together, and they were coming to town over the holidays. And so we said, let's try to have a photographer who could take some pictures of our getting together as two families, which she was happy to do because she was working on this family album concept that she had. And so she took a number of shots of our family, some 300, I recall, that had become, which those two fellows, the professors from Holyoke and Kansas, right, put together in a wonderful volume, the family album, and that was very popular and very successful, and a fine collection of Arbus's work.
In fact, the catalog for that exhibit features a picture of your daughter.
It does indeed, and the catalog. But there are other members of my family, or all of our family over there. My wife is in there, featured, and friends, and my brother came in with his family and his wife and his daughters and sons. So it was a full gathering, and she had a lot to work with, and she made good use of it.
Yes, especially with two families under the same roof.
Right, right.
Was it a pleasant experience working with her?
Very, very pleasant. Yeah.
That's fascinating. And the pictures are really wonderful. They exude emotion, and that's hard to do in a family photo.
It is, but also she catches the shyness. My younger daughter was very, very shy, and dear Leslie, and wasn't sure about the camera and everything, and Arbus caught those moments too, in the way she was hesitant, the way she would be sitting in her room and have her picture taken. But she caught all aspects of it, and she caught the joy of my brother and I singing together at the piano, which we like to do.
But what about your brother? Did he do anything on an amateur basis with the performing arts? Did he follow in your
No,
footsteps
he
in a way?
wasn't performing arts. He was a manufacturer, a very successful engineer in Detroit, and a successful fellow and wonderful family. And he became a trustee of the University of Michigan, and he had a wonderful career in life.
Fascinating. There was one other chapter in your life that really caught my attention when I learned of it, and it's a story from right here in Connecticut. For someone from Michigan, you have a long history here in Connecticut with many accomplishments. When you became affiliated with the American Shakespeare Company in Stratford. Just saying those words is kind of a thrill. Stratford, of course, just the name of the town and the location of a valiant attempt to make Shakespeare valuable to American culture today. At the time of your joining the group, they were looking for new ideas. It was a time of transition. What did you see as your goals at that time, and what did you take to it?
Well, the goals were really a deep challenge. It was the Shakespeare Theater was, audiences were depleting. We had film coming in. People were interested in film. Why do we need to go to a theater? What's so good about live performance? And this is a beautiful theater on the shore of Stratford on the Long Island Sound. We had to revive that and make it a happy, total experience so people could come with their families and, of course, and partake of the finest theatrical writer known to man, William Shakespeare, and that was a challenge. So the challenge was really reconstituting a board of active people who could help raise money to keep the theater going. It was a challenge, a great challenge.
Did you ever have an opportunity to perform in any of the plays presented while you were there, or was most of your work done behind the scenes?
Most of it was done behind the scenes. I think I had a small walk-on before I became president, and I was happy to have that on the stage there. But my work was largely raising money and organizing the board and the audience to come. So I was phasing into, after my theatrical career, into my fundraising career of the arts and scientific organizations, and they began raising money for the Yale New Haven hospital, cancer wing of the hospital, and raised money for Cold Spring Harbor Laboratory, a $2 million campaign there, and on Long Island. But that was after the theater experience.
Like I said, you're a Renaissance man in so many ways. how the how do you
What I
make?
wanted to say
Yes.
also to share with you, people are also interested, well, what about your children? Where are they interested? Do they do any of this stuff? And I'm happy to say that my dear daughter, Marcella Mathai, who is a Florida resident now, and has rubbed off to her. She's at work on, she worked for many years with the Florida Marine Laboratory in St. Augustine, Florida. And so the book that she's working on a book now. She's also a writer. She's a published poet, and she's working on a book on right whales and sea turtles and life. She said that's what she's working on, and then she will deliver it because she's a good writer. But my son is also working. He's a musician. He had a band of his own in the 90s called Wavelength Band, and he is now working with his daughter, who is a singer, and he's composing contemporary music and for songs for Sophie to sing on their album, which they are in the studio now making probably this very moment.
Can't wait to hear demos, can you?
Yes, I can. Right.
And part of your extended family goes from California to down in New Haven at Yale. You have grandsons?
Grandson at Yale on the Yale football team. Number 50,
What position?
defensive tackle.
Okay. And in California, you have a grandson who's studying computer science.
He's a senior graduating as a computer scientist from UC Berkeley, and will be pursuing his first opportunity work offer after his graduation with the company that he worked for last year as a technical assistant.
Let me ask you to get back to the fundraising portion of your career. What was it like in that atmosphere? This was in the 1970s. It was a time of social turmoil. Politically, it was a very difficult time in our country. A confluence of the end of the Vietnam War and all of the social upheaval that caused, plus the events around the term of President Nixon. What was it like in that charged atmosphere to try to bring people together for positive, good causes?
Well, in a way, it was very rewarding because after you'd worked at it, they were thrilled to have been tapped and be a part of it. So you were paid by their enthusiasm and their gratitude, I think, for that hard work of getting them together and introducing them to this kind of work.
In your experience, what does a theater of the prestige of the American Shakespeare Company bring to the community? How is the community better off for the presence of that?
Well, because they have the excellently produced live performances of some of the greatest plays that were ever written, and that opens a whole new phase in people's lives if they are not familiar with it. And so that's a great reward there. I remember people coming out of a performance saying, "Wow, I never knew he wrote that," or "That was a wonderful performance." And so it was that very present kind of reaction.
And it must be exciting when local community members hear names coming to their town. I've looked at some of the lists of people who've performed at the Shakespeare Theater during your time, and the names are, oh my, James Earl Jones.
Absolutely.
John Houseman.
Chris Plummer.
Chris Plummer. Lynn Redgrave.
Yes, absolutely.
Christopher Walken.
Absolutely. The best performers.
And one of my favorite actors, although probably not in the same luminary stratus as these others, but Fred Gwynne.
Yes.
Fred Gwynne, big, tall Fred Gwynne.
Yes, right. Wonderful fellow.
This must have been so exciting to have the very best, frankly, some of the best known actors working with you.
Mm-hmm. It was indeed. And I was pleased to welcome them to their first rehearsals and seeing them in their first dress rehearsals on stage, and welcome them to the American Shakespeare Theater, which they were then pleased to be a part of.
Mm-hmm. What are you doing these days?
Well, let's see, what am I doing these days? I'm doing exciting things.
Enjoying life, basically.
Enjoying life, yes.
Excellent. I understand that you're still talented at playing the piano and that you can get a room rocking.
Well, try to do that whenever possible.
Very good. Well, thank you very much for your time today. It's been an absolute delight getting to spend this time with you, Conrad.
Thank you, Jerry. I've enjoyed it very much. Thank you for your interest and your kind words and your conversations.
A delight to meet you.
Yeah.
Conrad Mathai, everybody. Thank you.
Mathai.
Mathai.